For the umpteenth time since the happy hour ban was enacted in Massachusetts 38 years ago by my guest of last week, by the way, former Governor Dukakis, after a string of deadly drunk driving accidents, the debate over discounted drinks is returning to the state and kicking up again. And while Governor Charlie Baker is throwing cold water on the idea, many bar and restaurant patrons are still pushing for the change. The Senate passed the plan in an economic development bill in July with language that would let cities and towns opt in to allow discounted drink specials. The House has yet to weigh in, but as for the governor, well, here's what he told us on Boston Public Radio this past Monday.
Maybe this is just me being, an old fuddy-duddy, but I think most places do just fine based on the current rules as they are. The simple truth of the matter is, people got overserved a lot in the old days, and I believe people will continue to get overserved, and there are consequences associated with that. And the consequences, in many cases, I don't think justify or are worth the benefit that's associated with 25-cent drinks.
You'd veto this thing, right, if it gets you?
Most likely, yeah.
I'm joined now by State Senator Lydia Edwards, who co-sponsored the Happy Hour Amendment, and Philip Frateroli, owner of Ducale and Ristorante Lucia and Cunard Tavern. Phil, Senator, good to see you both. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Phil, starting with you, many people, and I have to say, including me, just automatically assume, particularly after the pain that restaurants and bars suffered during COVID, that all restaurants would be all into this. You are not. Why?
Well, we just feel like, the speed consumption of alcohol is irresponsible. So by putting this forward and putting the onus on restaurants to either adopt this or lose out on a potential economic development or an economic surge, we just feel like it's not necessary. This is a dinosaur, a relic of the past, and to call it economic development for us in the inflationary period and the crisis that we are in right now after 2 years of the pandemic, we just think there's other things that the Senate and the House could be doing to help us. And one of those things is reforming the ABCC regulations around outdoor dining. That's something that was great that came out of the pandemic and stands to go away as soon as some of these executive orders end next year.
My understanding, Senator, is from the Mass Restaurant Association that Phil is not an outlier, that the majority of bar and restaurant owners agree with his position. Why'd you sponsor this?
Because I think a majority of people in Massachusetts want an option and want to be able to have this as something fun to do. I think, the fact is I'm sponsoring an opportunity for cities and towns to make up their own minds. So if this doesn't work in Boston, if this doesn't work in Cambridge, it may work in Fitchburg or places where there may not be as economically as advanced or as benefited as some of our restaurants in Boston. This is a statewide ban that I think needs to be broken up. And I think locally, cities and towns can come up with their own version of what makes sense for happy hour or decline to do it. We did this exact same thing when it came to cannabis. There are some cities and towns who simply said, we don't want it. They don't have it.
Well, how about the response to that, Phil? I'd take it one step further. Not only is there an option for a city or town not to opt in, but obviously, even if Boston, for example, opted in, doesn't require you to do anything. You can continue to not have happy hour. So why not give other restaurants in your community the option to do what they think might be best for them?
Well, I think that this is, you're looking at the state as a whole, and Boston and Cambridge, those are urban communities where people are less likely to be driving. They're more likely to be taking public transit. When you talk about Fitchburg and other cities and towns where the majority of people are going to be driving, let's look at the public safety aspect of this. We're encouraging them to drink as much as possible, as fast as possible, and sending them out on the roads. Like, who does that benefit? And if a restaurant around me or all the restaurants around me decide that they want to participate in this and they start giving out alcohol for pennies on the dollar, I'm going to be at a disadvantage relative to those people, especially in a staffing crisis that we're in. My bartenders, they're not as concerned about the impact on the business. They want to see that the tip money come into their pockets. So I might lose out on staff. I might lose out on opportunities that I wouldn't otherwise have because I took a stand on something that isn't really good for anybody except for the person looking to save a couple bucks and get blasted.
Phil, I want to stay with you for 1 second, though. I don't know if Senator Edwards did this, but other sponsors of the bill, her colleagues, and supporters of the bill in the legislature have talked about the fact that when Governor Dukakis banned this, there was no such thing as ride sharing. There was no Uber and Lyft option. And I have to say, from my personal experience, the attitude I had about drunk driving 38 years ago, or driving at least after I had a drink, is dramatically different. Thanks to Mothers Against Drunk Driving, thanks to people like Ron Bersani, who lobbied for Melanie's Law, which was named after his granddaughter who was killed by a drunk driver. Isn't this a totally different world on this issue 38 years after the fact?
Sorry, my baby was asleep for about half an hour.
That's
and I just woke
okay.
up.
That's perfectly
Can I pick him
okay.
up? Do we have a second? I would say, yeah, but I think we are in a different world, but at the same time, I don't think drunk driving has gone away as a problem. I think the opposite would be true. I think we still have problems with people operating under the influence, whether it's alcohol or drugs or whatever it is. So to think that Uber or in Lyft saves society from these ills, I think is a little bit simplistic.
Well, if I may, Senator, beyond Phil's argument that it's simplistic, when I listened to the governor say the other day he didn't think the Uber and Lyft thing solved the problem either, I thought about it after the show and I said, it seems to me the people who are most likely to responsibly take an Uber or Lyft if they've had too much to drink are not the people we're worried about. It's the people who've had too much to drink who aren't responsible enough to take an Uber and a Lyft and are much more likely to do something that can lead to great danger for others and themselves. How do you respond to that? Let's get the senator's response if we can, please.
Yeah, I mean, we don't make all of our policies, every single one of our policies, based on the fact that there are a few bad actors. I mean, if you want to just stop people from drinking outside and publicly, you can also just ban alcohol sales altogether. I mean, if you want to be very clear, there are people who have an issue with alcoholism. There are people who overdrink. Right now, happy hour isn't going to encourage more people to become alcoholics if they aren't already. If they're responsible drinkers, they'll be responsible drinkers. And I think, we just can't talk about the economic benefits of some restaurants. There's some very small restaurants that would love to have some business on a Monday night that they never would get. And maybe having a modified version of what is happy hour, and it doesn't have to be pennies on the dollars. We can come up with a system that is economically responsible, but also encourages people to turn off after a certain amount of alcohol. It's not a free-for-all. It is, I don't know, maybe because I went to undergrad and grad school in a different state that had happy hours, and it was something to do after work, and then you went home. And this is not, I don't know, I think there's a real disconnect of what exactly is happy hour, how it works, and who goes to it. It's mostly people coming right after work, and they go, enjoy, and then move on for the rest of their evening.
But you can't deny that if you're a recent graduate and you're not making a ton of dough, Senator, the likelihood of you having a second or a third drink is probably greater when they're cheap than when they're not, no?
True, and the likelihood of me going out is also greater. The likelihood of me supporting local restaurants is also likely greater. These are all benefits that come along with a version of happy hour. And again, making it a local option, allowing for cities and towns and down to the restaurant to be able to design it what's best for them is the safest option.
Phil, I'm running low on time. I interrupted you. Did you want to say something before about the Uber and Lyft thing?
In response to what the governor said, I think the people that are being attracted by lower pricing might be less likely to jump in an Uber, and they might be more likely to drive themselves. I mean, I was 20. When I was in my 20s, I lived in New York. I loved happy hour. I wish I could go back to the days where I had no responsibilities and could do that. But just because it's fun doesn't mean it should be brought back.
Before you two go, the first thing that Phil said here is he'd prefer the legislature spend time on something like allowing restaurants to do outdoor dining, which was one of the huge benefits financially, I think, and as a consumer and customer, a huge joy for people like me. Why hasn't the legislature addressed that issue and made it a permanent option for restaurants if they choose to do it, outdoor dining, that is?
I think the conversation is still going on, first of all, on outdoor dining. I don't think we still are hopeful to come back and continue our conversation on the economic development bill. So it's not a matter of it not being part of the legislature's mindset and possible conversation in terms of permanent solutions. But again, another area where Phil and I do disagree to a certain extent is how outdoor dining has been rolled out, where it should be rolled out, and whether every single neighborhood has been able to handle it appropriately. So I guess when I think about this, we've allowed outdoor dining to be something that goes down to the restaurant level in certain circumstances for them to determine what is safest. There's traffic issues, there's drinking issues, there were concerns. We've allowed all of these local economic issues to happen at the restaurant level. I think happy hour should be part of that conversation as well.
Well, you're both going to be back quickly to discuss that one because that's a huge one with me. Phil Frederoli, Senator Edwards, I really appreciate your time. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.